Unlock the secrets of your water system. Discover corrosion issues before they become costly problems. Don't just send your corrosion coupons to any lab. Send your corrosion coupons to a lab that understands your water treatment needs. B Labs is run by water treaters for water treaters. At B Labs, every corrosion coupon report includes a picture of your corrosion coupon before and after cleaning, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. To find out more, go to scalinguph2o.com/B Labs and up your corrosion coupon game. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/BELABS. B Labs, corrosion coupon reports done right. Accelerate your success. Why go it alone when you can get further faster and have more fun doing it? The Rising Tide Mastermind offers a dynamic environment where you can grow professionally and personally while enjoying the journey. To find out more about the Rising Tide Mastermind, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Find out if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I am Trace Blackmore. I may not sound like Trace Blackmore, but I assure you I am Trace Blackmore. And nation, as you know, even if you have a little cold, you got to keep the show going. So that is what I am doing today. And hopefully this voice isn't too off-putting to you. One of my favorite shows of all times was Friends. So if you are a Friends fan, you might remember the one where Phoebe got sick and she was, of course, singing all her songs, namely Smelly Cat. And she said she had sexy phlegm and that made her sound better. And then the rest of the episode, she got well and she didn't sound as good and she was trying to get people to get her sick. So I hope I didn't ruin that episode for anybody, but hopefully that's how you're taking my voice right now. Trace Blackmore has sexy phlegm, and we're just going to enjoy this voice while it lasts because I assure you very soon I am going to sound like I normally do. And hopefully that's what you prefer. Anyway, I guess that's enough talking about that. Nation, I'm going to do something a little bit different this episode because normally we give you some conferences, some trainings to go to. And I'm kind of curious if that's something that the Scaling Up Nation really likes. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to release a poll online, and we are not going to list out all of the events for today and the upcoming months on today's episode. We're going to have you go to scalinguph2o.com. And you can either navigate over to our events page or just put a /events on that URL. And you will read everything that I normally read. Now, normally I just read 3 or so events. I normally pick out the top 3 that I think you might be interested in. And then I point you to that web page. Again, that's scalinguph2o.com /events. Today, I'm just going to have you go there. And this is how we are going to test the market. We're going to test the Scaling Up Nation to see how valuable reading some of these events are. So thank you for helping me get some data to make sure that we are always doing what you want in this podcast. We're always making sure that this podcast is getting better. And somebody that helps us all the time to get better is our friend James McDonald. So here is a brand new installment of What Do You Know?
Hello and welcome to What Do You Know? The game show where we find out what do you know about industrial water treatment, drop by drop. So pump up your brain, take out that test kit of knowledge, and prepare to answer this week's question on What Do You Know? Today's question is, what is the process called when you mathematically correct for the impacts of changes in feed water quality, temperature, and pressure on reverse osmosis membrane data as compared to a baseline. Normalization. Don't be comparing apples to oranges. Normalize your reverse osmosis data, so you are comparing oranges to oranges. I'm James McDonald, and thanks for playing along with us. Stay tuned for next week's episode of Water You Know.
Thank you, James. Nation, here is our next interview. My lab partner is Patsy Root, Senior Manager of Government Affairs of IDEX Water. Patsy, welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Well, thank you, Trace. I'm really happy to be with you today.
I am happy to have you here. I had the pleasure of seeing the paper that you presented at the Association of Water Technologies just a few months ago, and you were so gracious. I approached you after that paper and I said, hey, this would be wonderful to talk about on the podcast, and you said you agreed. So thank you for that.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Well, Patsy, I want to make sure that the audience of the Scaling Up Nation know who they're talking to. Do you mind telling the Scaling Up Nation a bit about yourself?
So I am Patsy Root. I do work for IDEX Water. I live in Maine, and I have been with IDEX for about 18 years. I did start my career in a clinical laboratory, and then I worked for an immunology firm developing bioassays. But I've really always been a water person. You know, my dad, probably to my mother's great chagrin, my father had me on a sailboat on the Charles in Boston when I was literally an infant. And thereafter, I spent every summer on the ocean on my grandfather's boat. I've been a scuba diver and a snorkeler since I was 17. And I'm really lucky to live by the ocean in Maine. And I'm equally lucky that my sister lives by the ocean in Florida. And so my very best days are those that are involved with water and snorkeling. Professionally, I am pleased to be a member of AWT for several years. I'm on the Legislative and Regulatory, or for short, LEG-REG committee. And we're really excited this year because of the implementation of quorum. I really am looking forward to, working to help ensure that the membership of AWT really understands how they can be involved in the development of rules and regulations and standards and things like that.
Patsy, I want to unpack something because I am also a scuba diver. So you and I need to go scuba diving somewhere.
We could. I need a new wetsuit, but yeah.
So I'm a scuba dive instructor, and one of my milestones that I just hit last year was I certified my 1,000th scuba dive student.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
So where's your favorite place to scuba dive?
My favorite place to scuba dive is Exuma in the Bahamas. I've been going every year for several years, and I love clean, beautiful water that you can see straight down. It looks like it's 2 feet away and it's really 30. It's amazing.
Now, the Exumas are what, like a couple hundred islands that are put together?
Mm-hmm. They sure are.
Do you do a liveaboard when you go down there?
No, not yet, but that's on the bucket list, Trace.
Scaling Up Nation, a liveaboard is where basically you have a floating hotel for a week and you just go diving. Patsy, if I can recommend, and I get nothing, unfortunately, from the Aquacat, but the Aquacat is my favorite liveaboard in the Exumas. Highly recommend it.
Very good to know. I will take that under consideration next time in May.
We're going to have a Scaling Up H2O scuba cruise in the future. I can see it. This is going to happen.
I'm in.
You also mentioned the LEG-REG committee of AWT, and I am such a fan of volunteering with organizations like the AWT because that's where you really get things out of your membership. So you being on the LEG-REG committee, do you mind giving a little pitch to the Scaling Up Nation of what that committee does and maybe why they should look into joining either that committee or another one?
Well, I would say probably for me, the best thing about being on a committee at AWT is the fact that you can really leverage your core competencies. There are so many different committees within the organization. They have a wide variety to choose from that hopefully will match what your competencies are or what you want your competencies to be. And of course, as my great grandmother always used to say, it is the best way to network and grow the community around you of subject matter experts by volunteering. So I really encourage folks to participate in committees because that is how we get the work for the members completed.
I've met some incredible people because I volunteered, and they have given me some wonderful items throughout my career that I would have had no business asking them for. But because we had that relationship in volunteering, they freely help me out when I have issues. So I love that you say that's the best way to network. Well, Scaling Up Nation, just to make it easy for you, we'll make sure on our show notes page, we'll take you directly to the AWT committee page so you can look at that. But maybe you're a member of an organization that's not the AWT. That's fine too. There's going to be opportunities there. But take it from both of us. That really does heighten your membership. Well, let's talk about the paper that you presented at the most recent AWT conference. And I want to make sure I get the title right. So this was Data and Case Study of Effective Legionella Regulations. And I thought this was fascinating because you're taking information on how different municipalities are having people report and kind of saying, okay, well, what's working, what's not working, how do we make it better based on this data? Did I sum that up properly?
Yeah, you sure did. I spend a considerable amount of time here at IDEX pursuing my goal, which is to encourage the development of laws and rules and standards and guidance associated with water, but will actually protect both public health and the environment. So I had the opportunity to spend a considerable amount of time researching what various regions do, within the United States, within Canada, within Europe, Eurasia, and so on, and come to some conclusions. And I wanted to share at AWT, not just for the data sharing, but for the thought process and what should we be thinking about here? What would be realistic? What would be implementable? What would be cost effective? To make sure that membership knows, as I mentioned before, because of the Leg Reg Committee, they have an opportunity to have a voice within these various programs as they're developed. So trying to understand the best of the best and how to leverage that was the goal and the title of the presentation, Trace.
When I speak to other water treaters, most people are familiar with what's going on in New York, but they're not familiar that there's other bodies that also have rules and guidance around Legionnaire's disease. Can you share a few of those with our audience?
Absolutely. It's kind of surprising the hit or miss that we have with rules associated with the prevention of Legionnaire's disease. And there are some here in New York, which we are most familiar with here in the United States. But there's a mix of laws, regulations, guidance that's treated like regulations all over the globe. So, what I wanted to do in this paper was kind of point out the differences and similarities of these. And if we want to look at the variety besides just New York, there's the Veterans Administration directive, there's the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services mandate, there's the new law in New Jersey that just passed this summer, but there's also a rule in Garland, Texas, like just Garland, Texas. There's one in New Orleans, Louisiana, and then the state of Virginia. And then Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois, those three states have rules associated with the prevention of legionellosis, but just in healthcare related facilities. And then Massachusetts, Colorado, California, they have rules that if you use recycled water in a cooling tower or any other aerosolizing fixture, then it has to be free from Legionella bacteria. So there's a huge mix around the world of what various states, cities, countries, provinces, regions are doing, including outside the US. So, like Canada, France, most of the big five in Europe, Germany, UK, Australia. There's so many other countries that I tried to list out during the writing of the paper. And the really cool part is a couple of people came up to me and said, well, but do you know that there's also a rule here? And so I updated the list based on feedback during the conference when I presented the paper, which was awesome because that's what we need to do with each other is we need to understand where things are happening, what's happening, and how much of that should we consider leveraging as best practice.
I love that. We're keeping each other informed and making the industry better as we're doing that. Reading your paper, something that you did is you looked at all the United States. You also looked outside into Europe. What did you find? Do we have pretty much even Legionella cases being reported? Is one country reporting more than another? How do they stand up?
Well, it kind of depends on what you look at. If you look at, let's start with Europe, right? So if we look at Europe, where the drinking water directive was just recently recast, and I mean what we would call a rule revision here in the United States, that was done last year, I think it was. And what France has done is a little bit different than some of the other big five, like Germany or the UK or Italy and things like that. What Germany and the UK and Italy and other European countries have done is they've adopted a variety of rules and guidances and things like that focused on managing all 60 plus Legionella species. Whereas France has focused their rules and regulations for cooling towers and hot sanitary water in healthcare facilities on specifically managing Legionella pneumophila. But that's not the only difference because when you look at that list in the paper, what you see are some pretty good commonalities on fixture type, I guess I would call it. So, for example, if you look at Belgium, they have rules for healthcare, public pools, cooling towers. You look in China, it's cooling towers in their codes. And you look at Croatia, it's cooling towers in their laws. You look at Netherlands, and it's spas and pools and cooling towers, AC systems and stuff. So you land on a lot of common fixtures and types of buildings. So you land on obviously cooling towers as something that needs to be managed. You land on recreational water, which is pools, spas, hot tubs, saunas. And then you also land on sometimes drinking water. But when it says drinking water, it's typically the potable water inside of the building.
It's really interesting how you laid out the different sources that they're covering. And an example, Virginia's only looking at schools, and that's a direct result that there was an outbreak in one of the schools. And let's face it, that's how these things come to be. There's a reactive issue that there was an outbreak, and then that gets all the attention. How should, based on your research, we be more proactive as these legislators try to keep people safe and where they're going to work, where they're going to school, in their day to day?
Yeah. That's one of the things that I professionally have been trying to do is to help lawmakers, rule makers understand that we have an opportunity to do something in a very calculated, scientific manner when it comes to preventing legionellosis. So, what we want to make sure we understand is how these outbreaks and these rules happen. So, what I've noticed is that there will be an outbreak, there will be public outcry, and then there will be lawmakers who promise their constituents that they're going to do something about it. I'm sorry, you can't see my air quotes. So, what happens then is that the rules that are developed are typically specific to those particular fixtures that we just talked about, right? Because cooling towers, potable water, hot tubs, and stuff like that, those are very typical fixture types that have been the source of public eye, shall we say. So when the rule gets developed, it's usually extremely focused on a particular type of fixture. And as you know, Trace, probably the worst time to write a rule is when you're in the middle of a panic.
Right.
Yeah. So, what I think we should be doing as far as the lawmakers and the researchers and even the public and the membership of AWT is we should be paying attention to what's already been done, how effective it's been, has it worked over time, where are the gaps in what those rules and laws have, but take the best of those things and put them to paper and write rules and regulations in a sort of outline form that we all agree. And I say we because the AWT membership has such a breadth and depth of knowledge in how to manage water inside of a building. They are so, so, so good at this. But when I go to a legislator, they don't understand it, right? Because they can't understand everything. We have to be able to teach, to educate. And that's been my focus is let's look at what's worked before. Let's look at what hasn't worked. Let's understand what's reasonable and cost effective and doable and put that in the laws and regulations and encourage our lawmakers through outreach, like through the Leg-Reg committee, to adopt these measures so that all of the fixtures that could potentially be at risk are considered. They might not always be a risk, but we need to consider the risk. And the utilization of ASHRAE 188 as supported by Guideline 12 is invaluable in that kind of understanding.
That just seems like it would be common sense, but it's not common knowledge. And that's why we need people like yourself to educate the legislators. I'm referring right now to what do we call this? It's not an Excel, it's a matrix that you put together. And it is so random of all the municipalities and what they're looking for. There's no commonality between any of them.
Yeah, well, there's some commonality, and not in the actual writing of the rule or the existence of the rule, is that it was done reactively most of the time. But that's a commonality that you cannot see unless you understand the impetus of the rule. So that's an unseen thing. The other thing is there's some commonality between what the laws and rules look at for fixtures. There's some commonality there. They understand it's water aerosolizing fixtures, right? But there are some pretty big differences. And if you look at, we started with France and Europe, but if we look at like Quebec versus New York, and we look at the areas that have focused on what they're managing, then we can see some differences there too. And when I say the what I mean, Trace, is that some countries actually, most of them, to be honest, on that matrix that I presented in the paper, most of these areas are focusing on managing all Legionella species. Whereas if you look at the data and the statistics from the countries that are focusing on Legionella pneumophila specifically, you can see based on data that we have available today that those countries are actually more successful when the success measure is actually case numbers.
That's what I found most fascinating about your paper. And I guess that's the punchline of it. Before we go into that, do you mind explaining to the Scaling Up Nation all the different species, serogroups, and exactly what you're talking about right now?
Oh, yeah. So Legionella is a genus of bacteria that meets certain requirements in order to group them together in if you remember from biology in high school, remember the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and everything is categorized in that phylogenetic tree. So Legionella encompasses a group of bacteria, all called Legionella, and there's about 60 of them. It depends on which paper you read. Some say 50 something, some say 61. We're going to say about 60. So underneath Legionella's genus, there are species of Legionella that are also grouped but different from each other. For example, we're most familiar with Legionella pneumophila. That's one. There are 59 more. There's Legionella bosemaniae, there's Legionella anisa, and so on and so forth until you get to 60-ish. So each of these are grouped according to biochemical expressions of different proteins, of different activities and variances in food sources or environments that they can live in. So, for example, Legionella pneumophila likes to grow at a certain temperature, and it produces certain proteins that allow it to be internalized into amoeba and various other factors. And actually, recently, which is kind of cool, we're finding that pneumophila actually can express a protein that is, it's kind of like a collagen protein that I can't remember where the researchers were. I think they was Garrett et al. I can share the reference with you and the listenership later. But what they showed with Legionella pneumophila is this collagen-like protein. It actually recognizes other proteins on the surface of eukaryotic cells. Now, Trace, our body has eukaryotic cells, warm-blooded mammals. So it specifically recognizes things like macrophages in our lungs. They kind of look like amoeba to Legionella pneumophila. But what it also does is this particular protein on Legionella pneumophila also stimulates bacterial aggregation. So in other words, it's telling its neighbor Legionella pneumophila, hey, I found a really cool place to live. Come on over. So when you look at all of these 60 different species of Legionella, they all have been grouped for specific reasons. So all the Legionella pneumophila, and there are subtypes, I think that's the right term, of a Legionella pneumophila even. So there's Legionella pneumophila, there's Legionella pneumophila fraseri, Legionella pneumophila pascali, and so on and so forth. So they're grouped together because they have specific activities and they have specific actions. They're not all the same. So when you are talking about Legionella pneumophila, those activities, those biochemical activities and actions that they take, probably not knowingly, but they do. Hard to say what a bacteria thinks if it even does. But the pneumophila are different. And that's why they're all grouped together. And I think, at least the data make me think, that might be one of the reasons why those areas that are focusing on managing and testing for Legionella pneumophila are doing better. Because it's pneumophila that really makes people sick, and it's figured out how to upgrade itself to better infect us and produce more efficiently and survive longer. It's kind of creepy.
That's just fascinating. It's creepy, but it's fascinating. I mean, the fact that it can send these signals out and saying, hey, come join me. This is a good spot. Biology just fascinates me. We can probably go down a rabbit hole with that, but I'm going to try not to do that. You did point out that, some things that the World Health Organization was looking for based on what you just said was, hey, these things aren't present without Legionella pneumophila. Do you mind speaking a little on that?
Yeah. So interestingly, the Netherlands was trying to understand how they were going to work through the new requirements in the recast of the Drinking Water Directive. And they also wanted to understand what they should be focusing on. Should they focus on, all of the 60 Legionella species, or should they focus on Pneumophila? How should that be parsed out to best protect public health? And so what they investigated was what I call a common misconception. And that common misconception is, well, if Legionella species are there, then maybe Legionella might also be there because, the conditions are the same. Well, turns out that KWR's extensive research into this shows that's just not true. And the reason that it's not true is because the World Health Organization has these 5 requirements of a good indicator organism. So let me explain what an indicator organism is. So in our drinking water, our public utilities cannot look for every single potential pathogen in the water, right? So what they do is they look for an indicator organism. And what the indicator organism is in drinking water is total coliform and E. coli. And the reason they look for them is because they're an indication of warm-blooded mammalian feces intrusion into the water. So that's an indicator. So if you find total coliform, if you find E. coli in the drinking water, you've had an intrusion somewhere, or you've had a backflow preventer fail, or you've had not enough disinfectant or something. So there are 5 requirements for a good indicator. And what KWR found was Legionella species is not a good indicator for the presence or absence of Legionella pneumophila. Legionella species as a potential indicator only met 4.5 out of 5 of their requirements to be a good indicator. So essentially, Trace, what it means is if you find species, you found species. If you found pneumophila, you found pneumophila. Just because you found species, you cannot say that pneumophila is present. If you found pneumophila, it means that you cannot say that species were also present.
You did several case studies on this. You compared Quebec to New York State. We'll talk about that case study. What did you find as you were researching that?
So when we look at Quebec compared to New York City, because both of them have regulations around the registration, management, and water testing for cooling towers specifically. Both regions had very significant outbreaks. Quebec had a very serious outbreak. I think it was 2013 or 14. New York, 2015. It was really bad. So they both instituted laws. And what they wanted was to reduce the opportunity for cases and outbreaks of legionellosis. But one of the major differences that I've noted in the paper was that Quebec manages and requires testing for Legionella pneumophila, and New York City has registration and testing for all species of Legionella. So I understand that there could be other factors playing into whether Quebec or New York does better in reducing cases, things like enforcement and potential fines and stuff like that. But what I brought to the floor with this paper was that, just like in France, focusing on Legionella pneumophila, which is not a surrogate, which is not an indicator, but focusing on the actual pathogen, Legionella pneumophila. If we look at the case rate for both Quebec and New York, like obviously population adjusted, right? Because New York City is ginormous and Quebec is not. But if we look at it population adjusted and consider success, like the number of cases that have happened, Quebec is doing like so much better at reducing their case numbers. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're both going up. It's going up everywhere, right? And, the cases of legionellosis are increasing globally, but Quebec is 130% better than New York City when it comes to cases of legionellosis. And I believe, based on the data, based on the understanding that I have from the recent research, that their success in Quebec is due to focusing their actions and their remediations on the actual pathogen, Legionella pneumophila, and not the surrogate or an indicator or species. So that's New York City versus Quebec. It was pretty interesting, I thought.
Well, the second comparison you did was France versus Germany, the UK, Spain, and Italy. What did you find there?
I would say that's not much different. The fact is that both France and the other countries do focus on those things that are of highest risk as far as fixtures go, right? So for France, theirs focuses on cooling towers and hot sanitary water. Germany, they focus on potable water in buildings. Spain, they focus on cooling towers like France and also pools. Italy, it's potable water, cooling towers, pools and spas, and processed water. And in the United Kingdom, even though it's not a law, the guidance is treated like law. Their focus is potable water in the buildings, pools, spas, cooling towers, and processed water. So they're all focusing on things we know as AWT members that can be a risk, right? So they're all focusing on those different things that can be a risk. But one of the differences between what France has done and what the rest of the other, top 5 European countries have done is focus their management and testing on Legionella pneumophila and not, all other 59. And so in looking at the data, you would certainly see that if they're focused on pneumophila, they're doing like 50% less growth in cases of legionellosis than the other countries. And that's huge. I can't imagine. I mean, yes, just like with New York and Quebec, certainly could be other factors playing into that success, like the enforcement, potential of penalties, the other things can play into that. But certainly the fact that France is focused on managing Legionella pneumophila and the other countries are focused on managing species plays into this as well. Finding Legionella species just is not the same risk level. And I really think people are starting to understand and internalize that.
Do you think we'll get to the point where municipalities are starting to say, we just want to see Legionella pneumophila verified?
I think so. The new law that passed in New Jersey was focused on Legionella pneumophila. I also can say that as far as the Canadian provinces and the Canadian areas that have rules, all of Canada is focused on Legionella pneumophila, all the way from New Brunswick over to the city of Vancouver, and even the national directive in Canada, the MD 15161, focuses on Legionella pneumophila. It really has been successful for them.
We have lawmakers that listen to this podcast when it comes to topics like this. What do you want to say to them?
What I want to say is adopting water management planning is not hard. You can have a consultant, but it's certainly not necessary. ASHRAE 188 is an excellent resource to understand or to reference to best address risks in buildings that aerosolize water. Also, that the testing is not difficult. The control measures are not difficult. My favorite thing to say when I'm teaching about how to adopt ASHRAE 188 is keep the hot water hot, keep the cold water cold, keep the water moving, keep a decent disinfectant, like 0.1 ppm. And that's what they need to do. And I have found that, in my past, 6 or 7 years working with various legislative bodies around the country, they really want to understand. And once they do understand, as far as lawmakers, they really can become champions. But they just did not understand how easy developing a water management plan can be, how managing it is really starts off very simplistically and until and unless you may have a larger issue to address and tackle. But I was really heartened, like when I would sit on the dais, testifying in New Jersey and other states, the openness that people had in understanding how to prevent this disease. And we know how to prevent it. Like CDC says 90 some odd % of the time we can prevent this disease from happening. And when the lawmakers and their supportive staff hear those things, they become very empowered. And that's really what you need to make things work, right? You need to know how to fix things. And once you know that, then you have path. Don't you think, Trace?
I definitely agree with that. And I was really fascinated with your paper. I thought it was very well done. I think it's really going to help not only legislators, but also water treaters have conversations, because we get calls from legislators. When we had the event here in Atlanta a couple years ago, they called our office and they wanted us to help them out. So for you to help those water treaters out, what message do you want to have for them? How should they be speaking with people making law, and how can they guide them to make sure that they're protecting the health of the people in the best way?
Well, I would say we need to keep doing what we've been doing. So I think AWT as an organization has really embraced water management programs and planning. And I would say that AWT has also embraced through participation on the development of ASHRAE 188, ASHRAE Guideline 12, ASHRAE 514, and other standards, the CTI standard for Legionella, so on and so forth. I think because of, I like to think, because of my participation in LegReg, we've been able to talk about other things like the NASM 2019 report on the burden of Legionellosis, what the EPA is doing in association with drinking water as far as managing Legionella. But I think what, AWT members and the water treaters in general can do is utilize ASHRAE 188 to the best of your ability when you're thinking about helping a customer implement a water management program. Use the simplest things first. The hot water hot, cold water cold, keep water moving, decent disinfectant. And I would also say be really diligent about your risk analysis. That I spend a lot of time on when I'm teaching folks how to write a water management plan. And the last thing that I would say is if you really want to be thinking about the cost effectivity of the program to your customer and balancing that with absolutely protecting public health, then you should think about offering to do Legionella and Pneumophila monitoring in the building, because that will balance public health protection with cost effectiveness. I mean, that's been proven in a paper just this summer by Professor Spica out of Italy with his mathematical model that shows managing Legionella and Pneumophila in a building water system and managing all species in a building water system and the differences. There were nearly no differences in public health protection, but the cost savings was astronomical. Like you saved 27%. And I think a lot of that is because when you find Legionella pneumophila, you have a problem, right? Know that. When you find species, it's like, well, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? And the KWR research says not really a problem. So try saving your customers some money on, the implementation of any control measures, of any remediation, emergency things, and focus on the simple stuff first. Manage and test for Legionella and Pneumophila to protect the building owners and occupants, and protect their wallets. But also understand that you need to evaluate your program on an annual basis. Things change. Those are my recommendations, Trace.
Those are great recommendations. And with your permission, I'll make sure to put your paper on the show notes page so people can follow along. It really was well done.
Thank you, Trace. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate, people adding information. I've had several people reach out and say, but did you know this? And that is the best part, because no, I didn't know this. So let's put that in too. This should be a communal event because it's all of us that it gets to save, not just a single person.
Well, if you get more information and you want to do an update, you always have an open invitation to come back to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Oh, thank you, Trace. Appreciate that.
Well, I do have some lightning round questions for you if you're buckled up and ready to go.
Hang on. I got the 5 point. Let's go.
Patsy, if you could go back in time and talk to your former self on your very first day as a government affairs professional, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, I know that one. I would tell myself to share my opinion backed up with data to as many people as I can. Because even though I think I know a lot of information and I've gathered a lot of information over time, talking to other people everywhere is so important to make sure that you really understand and you're grounded in as much reliable data as possible. So talk to everybody.
I normally ask what are the last few books that you've read, but I want to take advantage of having somebody like you on the podcast. What are some of your favorite Legionella resources?
Oh my goodness. As far as people or papers?
You can list both. Why not?
So I really look up to Professor Michelle Gribble. She's with École Polytech in Montreal. She speaks and researches Legionella globally. She has a report that should be coming out fairly soon, published fairly soon, but she is absolutely fabulous, along with Sebastian Fauché at McGill. I would also say that Esprit, which is an organization, a nonprofit, just finished a Water Research Foundation project that was amazing. It was 2 years looking at Legionella pneumophila in 57 different municipalities across the United States. I really look up to that organization a lot. And I would say the third is Professor Spica out of Italy. For the longest time, we guessed a lot about what is the advantage monetarily, cost wise. What is the advantage of looking for Legionella pneumophila versus looking for Legionella species in a water management program? And which of the two, would best protect public health? And the paper that he put out this summer is an astronomical mathematical model that clearly showed, like for everybody, clearly showed that looking for pneumophila meets and ticks off all the boxes.
Patsy, there's no doubt that Hollywood is going to make a movie about your life. Who do you want playing Patsy?
Glenn Close.
That's what I would say too. I love that answer. Yeah, that's who I guessed. You can't see this, but I wrote that down. I play a little game with all my guests to see if I guess the right one.
That's too funny. Oh my goodness. Yeah, Glenn Close, for sure.
I think that's a good guess. And she would be lucky to get that part.
Aw, thanks.
Patsy, thank you so much for sharing so much about your paper. And you actually shared a little bit more than what we heard a couple of months ago. So thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you are doing. And thank you for being such a great resource.
You are most welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you, Trace.
Scaling Up Nation, what an informative podcast. And I know so many of you saw parts of that at the most recent Association of Water Technologies conference, but we got so much more information that Patsy was able to deliver because we had a longer time frame here on the podcast, and people are continuing to help her with her studies and giving her new information, and we got to get that update here today. So, Patsy, thank you for doing the research. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And Nation, it's my hope that you can take what you learned from that interview and start being proactive with talking with your customers and talking with the potential lawmakers out there. Trust me, you are experts when it comes to waterborne pathogens. And at the very least, you can connect them with the right information. Now, as far as information goes, we learned a long time ago that it was a very important topic with the water community when we talk about Legionella. So each and every August, we have Legionella Awareness Month. So if you search any of the podcasts in the August timeframe for the last 4 or 5 years, all those episodes are about Legionella or waterborne pathogens. But we did not stop there. There's so many resources that our great guests have shared with us for Legionella and waterborne pathogens. We created a Legionella resources page. So if you go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to our resources, click on Legionella, you will see every resource that is linked to the webpage where it resides. It is amazing all the things that my team has put together in one easy to navigate page where you can learn everything you wanted to know and maybe didn't know to ask about Legionella and waterborne pathogens. And what people are doing is they're taking some of those resources, or they're taking some of the podcasts that are out there and they're sending them to their customers. So that way their customers are primed for the conversation that they need to have with you about developing a water management plan. Or maybe you were like me and there's something going on in your town with Legionella, and the news finds your website and they call you. Nation, that was my experience a couple of years ago. Every news platform called me within the Atlanta area because we had something that mentioned Legionella on our webpage, and that made us the expert. Well, thankfully, I've been a member of the Association of Water Technologies for 2 decades, and I was in the know as they were developing ASHRAE 188. And I am personal friends with a lot of people that wrote ASHRAE 188. And I take my own advice. Not only listen to this podcast, but I try to stay up on what's going on. So I was able to answer all of their questions. And their number one question was, and it was very sensational, should people stay away from downtown Atlanta? I think somebody actually asked me, if somebody goes downtown, are they going to die? So they had no idea really what Legionella was, and they blew it up into something that was way out of proportion. And then on 4 different networks on their news programs, you could see me, and I was either in my office or I was on, actually that was before Zoom. Every one of them came here to the office. They probably do it on Zoom now. And they interviewed me, and I educated people on what Legionella bacteria was, what Legionnaire's disease was, and told them about where it could be found and how we protect ourselves. And you could just feel the entire temperature go down when people truly understood what it was. Now, maybe for them, that wasn't as exciting of a news story saying, hey, stay out of downtown Atlanta. Your pets are going to die if you go down there. I don't think that's what their goal was, but definitely I lowered the temperature there. So by all means, go to our resource page, read as much as you like. You will get better information there, and then you can send that to clients or legislators or whomever you like to reference some of the things that you're talking about. One of the things that Patsy mentioned were all the different legislations, all the different guidelines, all the different rules, and what they covered. And something that caught my eye, and it caught my eye because of episode 348, when our friend Christoph Lohr, Vice President of Technology and Resources at IAPMO, came and he was talking about all things plumbing code, and he mentioned dental offices and water pathogens. And the only country that did anything with dental offices that I saw on her list was Dubai. Now, the only reason that caught my eye is because I never even thought about that. So next time you go to the dentist office, maybe listen to episode 348 before you go there, and you might want to ask your dentist, what precautions are they taking with waterborne pathogens? Never thought about it before Christoph mentioned it, and now I've had that conversation with my dentist, and they're actually doing something about it. So episode 348, it'll make you a healthy dentist patient. Well, Nation, I'm always asking the Scaling Up Nation to help me out with what are the next guests that they want me to interview. And once again, I want to thank Patsy Root, our guest today, because she knows so many people in the world of Legionella. She is introducing me to some people that most likely you are going to hear this August. So Patsy, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for introducing me to some new friends of the Scaling Up Nation. Nation, I will have a brand new episode for you next week. We'll see how my voice is next week. But in the meantime, take care, everybody. Want to ensure you're fully prepared for the Certified Water Technologist examination? Our CWT prep course provides you with the tools and knowledge you need. From detailed study guides to a 100-question practice exam, we've got you covered. Visit scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep and start your journey to certification.